what book have you most recently read? Greg?
Great question, and I'm finding myself never reading just one book. So currently reading 3 books. One was completed, and that was my fun book. Adolescence of P-1 was my cousin recommended it, kind of in this offhanded comment. We were talking about artificial intelligence, and this was one of the early 1970s first forays into that. A lot of fun if you're into kind of light reading and into the kind of sci-fi, in the kind of computer-esque type of things. But P1 was this IBM computer that basically jumped and became a mind of its own and started connecting all the computers. And obviously, it's as relevant today as it was 40 years ago when it was written.
Very forward thinking, yeah.
Also reading Charles Duhigg, his second book, and remember his first book, The Power of Habit. Mark and I, we talk about it all the time. The psychology of an organization is the most difficult thing to capture in Lean. That's why people say you are a Lean practitioner, you practice Lean. It's not about the tools, because the soft things actually are that kind of that glue, if you will. And I think you find the soft things oftentimes in places where you don't expect it. And Charles Duhigg is one of those authors that writes about it. Power of Habit's great, but Smarter, Faster, Better, I've kind of pulled it up here for everyone to see, is his second book. A lot of fun. He's talking about 8 characteristics of people that are doing things smarter, faster, better. So he talks about motivation, teams, focus, talked about aviation, and I always just find it amazing where these aviation concepts and nuclear concepts and Lean concepts find their way into the world, because these are just normal principles, the way humans really should behave in kind of organism-esque ways in companies. So highly recommend it so far, about halfway through. And then the other one, we were kind of prepping for this, you said is a classic, and it was a classic perhaps for people, but when this came out, I would have just been starting residency in emergency medicine, and so I wasn't reading it, but Jim Collins' Good to Great, where he talks about 7 characteristics of companies that completely outperform the market by 5 and 10 and 15x over 15-year periods, so not over these short terms. And I'm really talking about first opening chapter. Guess what it's about? Leadership. Yeah. We heard that before. So what about you, Mark?
Well, so I start a lot of books. One that I actually got all the way through and finished is a book from actually 1994 called Comeback. It won the Pulitzer Prize, written by 2 journalists, so squarely nonfiction. You can see a car plant there. But it's a book from 94 looking back at the auto industry in the early 80s as Toyota and Honda were entering the U.S. There's a lot of early history going through the early 90s about General Motors and Toyota and their joint venture factory in California called NUMMI, which opened, I believe, in '84. And so, yeah, at this point, it's history. I started in the auto industry in 1995, right after a lot of this had happened. But I found it really fascinating because it talks about, there's a couple chapters about culture change and leadership, and why did GM not better take advantage of the opportunities to learn from Toyota, and why? So I had a chance to reach out. I did a podcast interview with one of the guys who's featured in a couple of chapters, Steve Barra. He was one of the first GM people to go work at Toyota, and it makes me think about the healthcare field here in the year 2016. Why is culture change challenging? Why do people sometimes stick their heads in the sand when there are competitive challenges? And a lot of it comes down to culture and leadership, and I guess that's a key part of improvement in what we do here at KaiNexus. So I found that book not just about interesting history, but it was making me think about what's happening today.
Yeah, and I think kind of referencing one of the other webinars that we've had in the past, Mark Graban with the J-A-B-E-N, an ER doctor, really got into the science of change and how kind of the brain works, and we're kind of getting into psychology or the stuff that's really hard to wrap your head around, you know, a bit beyond a 5 whys or a fishbone where you can kind of see it and touch it and work your hands through it. But the other stuff is arguably harder, and it's like becoming enlightened, you know, if you're a Buddhist monk. I mean, that's just, there's not like a 10-step process to do that, you know.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff.
Yeah.